All right, in this video, you are going to review some of the notations and vocabulary that you would have learned in Integrated Algebra and Geometry 1. These are going to be very important in this first unit as we move into all of the topics we're going to explore in Integrated Algebra and Geometry 2. Starting off with, we're going to review some of the vocab. I've already got the vocab listed for you. The pictures are there for you. We're just going to talk about how to name each of those. So for the first item that we're going to look at, the vocabulary term is a point. You've got your picture there. A point is just a dot right there. And it has this letter A next to it. When we name a point, we just call it by its letter or designation. So we would just call the point A, and we would just write the letter A. Pretty simple. Now lines, you kind of have two different scenarios, and I've got those here for you in the picture. Scenario one is you might have a line that's named by a lowercase letter. In which case, if you have that, then we would just either write that out as line N. Now, in some cases, your line is going to have a couple of points on it. This is kind of your second scenario. In this case, we have the point M and the point N. There are two different ways that we can name this line. One is that we can name this line NM with this symbol over the top, so a line with arrows pointing in both directions. We could also switch the order, so the order does not matter. You could also call this line MN, and again have that line with the arrows pointing in both directions over the top. Now this is different from a line segment. So our next term is a segment. We've got that here. Notice that rather than having the arrows pointing out in both directions, there's actually a starting and a stopping point. Notice that it does not go past A and it does not go past D. It's just those points that are between A and D. Again, there's kind of two ways you can name that. You can either name that AD with a bar over the top, or you can name that DA, again with a bar over the top. So notice the difference in the name. It does not matter the order that you write the letters, but you have to make sure that the symbol that goes above those 2 points is a line without the arrows pointing in either direction. Our next vocab term is array. So for array, it is important the order that you write these in. You have to start your name with whichever end has the point, and then the name ends in the direction that the arrow is pointing. In other words, this would be called Ray JK. It would not be called Ray KJ. That would not be a way to name this ray. So rays, you do have to be careful the order that you write those in. All right. Our next vocab term is the angle. So when you're looking at an angle, there's actually a few different ways that you can name that. The first is if there's a number, you can name it by that number, and we could call that angle 3. The next, as long as it's not too ambiguous, is that we can also name it by the letter right at its vertex. So we could name this angle K. Probably the most unambiguous way, or the way that's going to be least confusing for most people, is to name it in an order such as angle TKA or as angle AKT. So notice that K is in the middle of both of those. Those are the same angle. One last vocab term that we're going to talk about before we do an example so that you can see all of these in practice is vertical angles. So just as a reminder, when you're looking at vertical angles, and by vertical angles, let's say these angles that I've got right here, angle 1 and angle 3, that I just wrote into this diagram, these are what are called vertical angles. In any pair of vertical angles, we can say that angle 1 is congruent to angle 3. We could also do that for another pair of angles. So we could say angles 2 and 4 are also congruent. Congruent in this case also means that the angle measure is the same. So the measure of angle 1 is equal to the measure of angle 3, and the measure of angle 2 is equal to the measure of angle 4. Okay, so let's take a look at an example. I've got a diagram over here for you. Lots going on in this diagram. We're going to go kind of through these 8 different things so that you can be sure you know how to name everything correctly. the first thing it asks us to do is to name two intersecting lines. Now we can do that a couple of different ways. We've actually got three lines and they're all intersecting each other. I'm just going to pick this line right here and this line right here. So the two that I've drawn over in purple. The first line that I highlighted was line BH, which again, if you wanted to call that line HB, that works too. The other was line DG. And again, there's a bunch of different ways you could name those. That is just one of the many ways that you can name those two lines that intersect. And notice that their point of intersection is at point E. All right, the second thing, name three collinear points. Collinear means that they are all on the same line together. For example, if you look at line AJ, there's also the point F on it. So three collinear points we could say would be point A, point F, and point J. All right. For number 3, name three non-collinear points. So this would mean that the 3 points are not in line together. For example, K, J, and L are not in line with each other. There's no way that you could draw one single line between those 3 points. So they would be an example of non-collinear points. Next, number 4. It's going to ask us to name 2 different segments. Now remember that this is different from how we name lines. So for segments, we might say that segment EF is a line segment. And again, remember when naming segments that you don't put the arrows on the line above EF. We could also say that BC is a line segment. And there's many more that you could pick from. For number 5, this is kind of a tricky one. It's going to have us name 2 different rays. So remember, rays have to start at a point and then continue in one direction. For example, if we started at point F and went in the direction of G, we could name that a ray by saying FG, making sure that the arrow points from F to G. Another example, we could start at E and go in the direction of H. So that would be ray EH. All right. For number 6, we're going to name a pair of vertical angles. So vertical angles will look for a pair of angles such as where I've just labeled number 1 and 2. Just to get some practice with naming those. For angle 1, we could call that either angle DEH or angle HED. For angle number 2, we could call that CEF or angle FEC. Here's an example, though, where you would not want to say angle E. So angle E would be very ambiguous. By ambiguous, what I mean is that if you just said angle E, we wouldn't be sure if you were talking about this angle E, or this angle E, or this angle, or this angle. That was why it was important to use all 3 letters when naming those 2 vertical angles. All right, for number 7, name one obtuse angle. As a reminder, obtuse means that the angle is more than 180 degrees. Later on in number 8, we're going to name an acute angle, which an acute angle has to be less than 90 degrees. And in fact, I wrote the wrong thing and said the wrong thing. Obtuse angle, let me correct, greater than 90 degrees. Whereas an acute angle is going to be less than 90 degrees. So let me clarify that. Okay, so for angles to be greater than 90 degrees, remember 90 degrees is a right angle. Let's find an example of one of those. So for number 7, we could look at this angle right here, which is certainly more than 90 degrees. That would be angle DEC. All right, one last thing to find here. On number 8, one acute angle. So now less than 90 degrees. We've already used it, but we can use it again. In this case, angle DEH would be an example of an angle that is less than 90 degrees. All right, that's all we've got for today. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. Next time, we'll be talking about how to solve equations.